People are told that money is the reward for hard work. It isn't. Money is the reward for ownership. Hard work is what you do until you understand that. There are two types of people inside every economy: those who sell their hours and those who collect the hours of others. The first group calls this a career. The second group calls it infrastructure. Time is not currency. Time is the raw material that currency is extracted from. The worker converts time into money. The owner converts other people's time into wealth. These are not the same transaction. The middle class was sold a sophisticated lie that education purchases security. It doesn't. Education purchased compliance. Security belongs to whoever controls the institution. Debt is not a personal failure. Debt is an engineering decision made by someone else. It keeps labor available, mobile, and desperate. A desperate worker is a reliable worker. That was always the design. Most people spend their entire lives building someone else's asset. They call it a job. They feel grateful for it. The gratitude is not an accident. It was manufactured along with the wage. There is a word for a person who works harder as their situation grows more desperate. That word is exploitable. The system does not fix this. The system depends on it. Capital does not rest. It moves. It finds the cheapest labor, the weakest regulation, the most desperate geography. Workers compete with each other. Capital competes with no one. It writes the rules of the competition. There is no version of the hustle that ends in ownership. Hustle is a feature of the machine, not an exit from it. The exit requires something the machine cannot sell you, a position above the mechanism. The system does not hide. It announces itself daily, in the architecture of cities, in the structure of tax codes, in who gets bailed out and who gets evicted. The information is public. The literacy is not. The question was never whether you would work hard. Everyone works hard. The question is who keeps what you build. That question has a structure, and the structure has a name, and the name was never spoken in any classroom that needed you to stay inside it. Wages did not emerge from generosity. Wages emerged from calculation. The minimum wage was never the floor of human dignity. It was the ceiling of what labor could demand before the owner replaced the body with a machine. There is a difference between being busy and being productive, and a larger difference between being productive and building something that produces without you. Most people never reach the second distinction. The first one consumes them entirely. Networks are not social. They are structural. Every introduction is a transaction. Every alliance is architecture. The wealthy do not collect friends. They construct webs of mutual obligation that function long after any single meeting ends. The newspaper told the worker what to fear. The pulpit told him what to accept. The school book told him where he belonged. None of these institutions were built by workers. All of them were built for workers. There is a difference. Land was the original leverage, not gold, not currency. Land. Because land cannot be manufactured, reproduced, or dismissed. Whoever holds the land holds the terms on which everyone else exists. Every other form of wealth is a derivative of this idea. Standards are invisible prisons, dress codes, accents, vocabularies, table manners. These were never about refinement. They were filtration mechanisms. They separated those who belonged from those who could be excluded without explanation. The factory did not create poverty. The factory organized it. Poverty already existed, scattered across fields and villages. The factory gathered it, concentrated it, made it legible, and put it to work, then called the arrangement progress. Charity is not generosity. Charity is maintenance. It keeps the discontent below the threshold of disruption. It provides just enough relief to prevent the kind of organized desperation that might redesign the system. It has always been cheaper than reform. Scarcity is sometimes real, but scarcity is more often manufactured. Artificial scarcity is the oldest pricing mechanism. It does not require shortage. It only requires control of the supply and the willingness to restrict it. Legacy is the final form of leverage. It moves through time rather than through space. It ensures that the children of architects inherit architecture, and the children of workers inherit only the obligation to work. Two births, two completely different games. Power does not announce itself. It does not need to. It speaks through waiting rooms, application forms, approval processes, and the studied silence of those who hold the yes. The architecture of permission is the architecture of control. The exit from the system is not rebellion. Rebellion is still inside the system. It is a reaction to the machine, which means the machine still sets the terms. The exit is comprehension, understanding the architecture so completely that you stop asking it for permission and start building beside it. There are three things the wealthy protect above all others: their time, their principle, and their optionality. The worker protects none of these. He spends all three before he understands their value. Interest is the rent charged on the future. Every loan is a landlord relationship measured in time rather than space. The borrower pays to live in tomorrow before it arrives. The lender collects that rent indefinitely, whether he wakes or sleeps. The market is not a democracy. Votes are denominated in capital. $1, 1 vote. The man with $10 million casts 10 million votes on what gets built, who gets employed, what disappears. The man with nothing abstains involuntarily. Diversification is not caution. Diversification is the spreading of risk across systems so that the failure of any single one cannot destroy the whole. The worker puts everything into one employer. The owner never puts everything into anything. Insurance was invented not to protect the poor from catastrophe, but to protect capital from uncertainty. It transferred risk from those who could absorb it onto those who could not refuse to pay for the transfer, then sold them the policy as peace of mind. The corporation was a legal invention, not a natural phenomenon. It transferred liability from the person to the entity. The owner could now profit without limit and lose only what he chose to risk. A wall between consequence and accumulation, written into law by the accumulators. Ambition was the most efficient control mechanism ever deployed. It convinced the worker that his subjugation was temporary, that he was not trapped but merely in transit. The cage was bearable because he believed he was building a key inside it. Shame was cheaper than surveillance. If you could make a man ashamed of his poverty, he would police his own condition. He would work harder not to escape the system, but to escape the shame the system attached to failing within it. Consumption was the substitute offered in place of ownership. You cannot own the factory, but you can own the product it makes. The television, the automobile, the appliance. Each purchase made the worker feel more like a participant. Each purchase made him more dependent. The 40-hour week was not a gift, it was a negotiated extraction rate. Below it, workers were too exhausted to produce. Above it, they began to organize. The 40 hours was the discovered optimum for maximum sustainable output with minimum political risk. Fear of replacement is not a modern anxiety. It is the primary management tool of every era. The threat need never be spoken. It lives in the surplus of available labor waiting outside the gate. The queue outside is the real supervisor inside. The news was never neutral. Every newspaper had an owner. Every owner had investments. Every investment shaped what the paper called a crisis, what it called progress, and which workers it described as agitators. The framing was the product. Religion promised the worker that his suffering had cosmic significance, that patience was virtue, that the meek would inherit. Not now, not here, later, elsewhere. The promise of another economy in another life kept the arithmetic of this one from being questioned. Nationalism was the technology deployed when class consciousness became dangerous. If workers could be convinced they had more in common with their owner than with a worker across a border, the horizontal solidarity that threatened the vertical structure was neutralized. The first asset is not money, it is attention. Where a person places their attention across decades determines everything else. The worker's attention was rented along with his labor. The builder's attention was never for sale. The question is never whether the opportunity existed. Opportunities have always existed in every era. The question is whether you were positioned to see it, funded to pursue it, and connected to execute it. Position precedes opportunity, not the other way around. The first act of financial architecture is not investment. It is the creation of margin, the gap between what comes in and what goes out. Without margin, there is no capital. Without capital, there is no position. Without position, there is only participation in someone else's system. Mentorship was the hidden variable in most success stories that were edited out of the public account. Not because it was shameful, but because it suggested the path required access, and access suggested it was not purely individual, and that complicated the mythology. The second business is always easier than the first, not because the owner is smarter, but because the first business bought him something more valuable than money. It bought him credibility, and credibility is the currency that opens every door that money alone cannot. Information asymmetry is the foundation of every profitable transaction. The buyer knows less than the seller, or the seller knows less than the buyer. The person who closes that gap consistently, who knows what others do not, does not need exceptional intelligence. They need better intelligence. Reputation is infrastructure. It takes years to build and seconds to deploy. The person known for keeping his word does not need a contract for every transaction. He moves faster, costs less, and closes things the documented man never reaches. Trust is a balance sheet item that never appears on a balance sheet. The railroad did not simply move goods faster. It reorganized time. It standardized clocks across regions, collapsed distance into predictability, and made coordination at scale possible for the first time. Every technology that changes time changes power, always. The patent was the moment craft became capital. Before the patent, knowledge lived in the hands of the maker. After the patent, knowledge lived in the document. The document could be sold, licensed, inherited, and leveraged without the maker ever being present again. Distribution is the moat that drowns most good ideas. The better product rarely wins. The better distributed product wins. Control the channel, and you control what reaches the market, what price it reaches at, and which competitors never arrive at all. The middleman was never just a convenience. The middleman was a toll. He sat between producer and consumer and collected the difference. The most powerful businesses in history did not make things better. They made themselves impossible to bypass. Standards become monopolies quietly. The first company to define the standard for measurement, connection, or compatibility does not need to win every sale. It needs only to ensure that every sale, everywhere, requires its system. Then it taxes the ecosystem rather than competing within it. The holding company was the architecture of distance. It allowed the owner to benefit from an enterprise while remaining legally removed from its consequences. Profit traveled upward without friction. Liability stopped at the subsidiary. The distance was not geographical, it was structural. Vertical integration was not efficiency, it was the elimination of negotiation. When you own the mine, the railroad, the factory, and the distribution, you have no suppliers to negotiate with, no intermediaries to pay, and no competitors who can undercut your input costs. You removed the market from your supply chain and replaced it with authority. The law does not protect everyone equally. The law protects property. If you have property, the law is your infrastructure. If you have no property, the law is your constraint. The same document performs different functions depending on which side of ownership you stand on. Inflation is a tax with no legislation required. It erodes savings held in currency while leaving assets denominated in hard property untouched. The worker holds wages. The owner holds land, equity, and commodity. Inflation moves value silently from the first group to the second without a vote, a signature, or a debate. Zoning laws determined which neighborhoods would accumulate value and which would be held static. They were presented as urban planning. They were economic programming. The map decided the future before the residents arrived. The residents then spent their lives wondering why their effort produced so little equity. The audit is not accountability. The audit is performance. It creates the appearance of scrutiny while examining only what its client chooses to present. The real accounts are never in the building that the auditors enter. Power does not submit to inspection. It performs inspection. The think tank was invented to give private interest a public voice. It produced the studies that became the citations that became the policies that served the funders. The chain between the donor's interest and the legislation was never documented in full. It was never meant to be. The revolving door between regulator and regulated was not corruption. Corruption implies deviation from the intended function. This was the intended function. The regulator who becomes the executive takes his knowledge of the regulation with him. The executive who becomes the regulator takes his loyalty with him. The door turns. The system is maintained. Most people will never own the system, but understanding it is not the same as accepting it. Comprehension is not defeat. The person who sees the architecture clearly has already separated themselves from the majority, who will spend their lives describing its symptoms without ever locating its source. The system was designed, every part of it, by people, in rooms, on documents, at specific moments in history, which means it was not inevitable. It was chosen, and things that were chosen can be understood, and things that can be understood can, by those with the patience and the position, be built around, not dismantled, built around. That is the only exit that has ever worked.